Hello, everybody. I am delighted to be here. I'm greatly honored to be asked to speak about how we fund transportation in Missouri and how we could fund transportation in Missouri and how they do it in some other areas. So let's begin. We're going to talk about the practical, possible, and theoretical ways we do pay or we could pay for transportation in Missouri. I'm going to start off with the same question. Whenever I give these talks, I start off with this question. And the number of people who know the answer is always directly proportional to how close we are to it. So here, most of you might know this. But we have exactly one tolled transportation asset in the state of Missouri. Who here can tell me what that is?
Community Bridge, Lake Ozarks.
Lake Ozarks Community Bridge. All right, somebody else here loves Party Cove. That's right. Me too.
Been there, done that.
Me too. Me too. So it's the only toll in the entire state, bridge or highway, until there used to be a few other bridges in the state, but they've both gone towards, they've either closed or are now free bridges, but we've never had toll roads in the state. And I'm going to give you one tip. This will, if you save a little money from this some point in your life, this will pay for the cost of this lunch and probably a little bit more. And the hint I'll give you is a very tax-specific question. So why should you not buy cars in Missouri in December? Think of those sort of Lexus Christmas event sales with the big bow. Yeah. Right, perfect. Property taxes on your car are based on what you own on January 1st of that year. So if you wait just a week after Christmas to January 2nd, you save an entire year's worth of property taxes. So that is, I did that this year. We bought a car on January 3rd. Right, exactly. And Lexus knows this. Those Lexus ads in sales in Missouri run until January 2nd. So, all right. MoDOT put together this chart. It's very informative, and they share it around a lot. And I want to share it too, but I do want to credit them. And as you can see, it talks about the miles in the state highway system, the gas tax in Missouri, and where Missouri ranks as to revenue per mile. And as you can see, we rank 44th in the country in revenue per mile. We have a lot of roads in our state highway system which in other states would be probably handled at the county level. That's why we have so many more miles. But as you can see, the gas tax is lower than all of our surrounding states except for Oklahoma. The difference is our gas tax is more technically 17.3, which I'll get into in a second, where Oklahoma's is a flat 17. So they're a little lower. They make extensive use of tolling in Oklahoma as well. We don't have that here. So this is a great map, and I'd be happy to forward this to anybody who might want it for other purposes. How do we pay for our roads in the state of Missouri? We pay a number of ways. Principally, we pay via gas taxes. And as I said, it's 17.3 cents per gallon in Missouri, 7th lowest rate in the country. And that 17.3, at 17% is the gas tax, and 0.3 cents of it are various transportation or other type fees that get added on. The federal gas tax is 18.4 cents, and we have the same tax in Missouri for diesel and regular gas. The feds have a 6-cent higher diesel tax. But when you compare Missouri to other states, and one of the things I'm talking about here, and I'll get into it in more detail later, is other ways to pay for it. Should the gas tax be higher? Is the gas tax properly counting for all the costs of driving? And one of the questions that comes in is that you read these studies, and we'll hit on some a little bit later, that say the gas tax should be X amount or Y amount to deal with the cost of driving. And I think a lot of those studies fail to consider that in various states they pay for transportation other ways. One of the ways we pay for transportation in Missouri is through real and personal property taxes. Every state, every county in Missouri, and every township in township counties has a road and bridge fund. So every time you're paying for your taxes on your house or your car, you're paying into that road and bridge fund. The 2008 Boone County rate is 4.75 cents per $100 of assessed valuation. That is extremely low. I'm not sure if that's the lowest of every county in Missouri. It's certainly among the lowest. And there's one reason for it, which we'll get into at the next slide. But that is how you pay principally for your local roads here in Boone County. That and gas taxes, which on the last slide, a portion of that state gas tax gets sent back to cities and counties for their own local roads. Kansas City has a very unique land tax for their roads. If you've been to Kansas City, they have these just beautiful parkways and boulevards that get you through the city. And they have a unique to Kansas City land tax. It's not based on the value of the building or the improvement there. It's just a low rate on the land, and that's how they pay for a lot of their local parkways and local boulevards. They also have a frontage fee for property along some of those roads, where you pay a set rate depending on how wide your property is along those roads. That's unique to the state. And one of the things I'm going to talk about today is the way different counties and different cities in the state pay for certain things. So, but the Kansas City one is very intriguing. We pay for, aside from property taxes, we pay for transportation every time we buy something in Missouri, in most of Missouri, that is subject to sales taxes. We pay many cities and counties in Missouri, 211 cities to be exact, have a transportation sales tax. Columbia has one, and we'll give you that detail in a moment. Tends to be the larger ones. About half of the cities in Missouri with more than 10,000 people have their individual transportation sales tax, excluding counties and cities in St. Louis County. Because in St. Louis County, they do sales tax collections different from the rest of the state, and that's a whole story all to itself. But so many cities and most of your larger counties also have a transportation sales tax. That's one of the reasons, and probably the principal reason, why your Boone County property tax is so low, because you're paying a Boone County sales tax as well. When you buy something in Columbia, you're paying a half cent or half of 1% to the Boone County Road Fund and a half of 1% to the Columbia Transportation Fund. These fund roads. A lot of these sales taxes around the state also fund transit. That's the principal way in which we fund buses, and in in the St. Louis area, light rail through sales taxes. There are numerous other ways that we pay for transportation in the state of Missouri that all kind of get into the system, and they're all sort of minor. Every time you get a driver's license, every time you're renewing your plates, you're paying a fee that goes to MoDOT generally. When developers build along major roads, oftentimes those developers have to pay a fee into that county or city road system for the ingress and egress rights. Transportation development districts, these next three are kind of all together, special road districts, and transportation corporations. These are three ways for sort of quasi-governmental entities to fund and to develop roads or bridges in certain areas. Transportation development districts are very common in urban areas. Special road districts are much more common in rural areas. For example, Columbia has 8 transportation development districts, and the stat I got that from was a few years old, so it could be higher at this point. How many are 13. They're generally done in our cities along with retail redevelopments, and where the developers will form these transportation development districts. I think they're a very good way to pay for local districts or local improvements. However, the state auditor has identified some very legitimate concerns with transparency, so people don't really know what they're paying for, and I think those transparency laws need to be very strictly enforced. But with that, TDDs can be very successful. Special road districts, as I said, much more common in rural areas. Boone County has one, the Centralia Special Road District, which pays for roads in that area out of the county's funds. You can do that several ways. You can level additional taxes in special road districts, or you can form them to just guarantee a portion of the county road fund within that area goes to that. I think that's how they do it in the Centralia Road District. I don't think it's any additional taxes. Direct user fees. For example, the toll over Lake Ozark Community Bridge, but also direct user fees could be a bus pass. It could be a municipally owned parking lot. When you pay to park there, that might go into your fund. So we really don't have nearly as many of these direct user fees as they have in many other cities and states. And finally, your most extreme example is privately owned roads. These are actually, they used to be very common in the St. Louis area, particularly along the Central Corridor. I don't know how many of you are too familiar with St. Louis. Kind of the Central West End, Clayton, U-City area. they're becoming much less common, but they still have plenty of neighborhoods where the homeowners own the road. And every 10 years or so, when it's time to redo the road, they assess all the property, generally according to frontage, and just pay for their own road. It's a very interesting way, sort of a very free market way to own your neighborhood streets. But as I said, it's becoming far less common as more and more often as those assessment periods come up, neighborhoods are trying to sign the roads over to their local city to pay for it. So, and finally, bonds backed by parking revenues don't always go to transportation, but they are they're a major way in which local governments in Missouri fund all sorts of improvements. They'll issue bonds based on their revenues at their local garages, local lots. In St. Louis, they do this enormously in St. Louis. They fund all sorts of things that you would never imagine have been funded by the bonds based on what you put into the meter. All right, now here we're gonna get, this is fun. I enjoyed putting this together. This is the average resident of Columbia, what you pay in direct annual taxes to transportation. So this excludes your 6-year driver's license. This is what you're gonna pay for 1 year. So what do you pay here? And here are our assumptions. You drive 15,000 miles a year, average 20 miles a gallon, live in a $100,000 home. These are your appraised values, not your assessed values. Own a $10,000 car and spend $10,000 a year on taxable goods within Columbia. You're gonna pay $138 in federal gas taxes, $129.75 in state gas taxes. Director Pete Ron of MoDOT was quoted a while back saying that if the average Missourian knew what their state gas tax bill was each year, they'd probably think it was a lot higher than it is. I certainly agree with that. I think the average person, if they were just guessing, would think they're paying a lot more than they are. You're paying $10.61 in road and bridge fund property taxes. These are not your other property taxes. And again, I keep saying it up because this is very, very low. This is certainly among the lowest in the state. By comparison, in St. Louis County, and it's a good comparison because they have transportation sales taxes there too, much like in Columbia and Boone County. Their sales tax is just a little bit lower than what you're paying in Boone County, and their road and bridge property taxes are more than twice as high as here in Boone County. So you're having very efficiently run road and bridge departments. Commend your local officials. You pay $10,000 on taxable goods. You'd pay $100 in local transportation sales taxes. This would go to roads. A lot of this would go to your bus system too. You pay $57.53 for annual registration and license plates in the state. This was I used the assumption of the highest taxable horsepower, which most cars and trucks are in. If you have a particularly small car or a motorcycle, you're going to pay a little bit less than that. And you pay $12.50 for a Columbia City motor vehicle tax, which could go into general revenue, could go into transportation funding. But in my research on Columbia, that's what we saw there. $448.39 in direct annual taxes for transportation. And there's certainly exclusions. There's general revenue in certain areas that can also go to transportation, but this is the most exact count I could get. I think a lot of people would think that they're paying more than that, but we have generally low transportation taxes in Missouri. We fund roads when we buy our car, register our car, fill the car up with gas. We pay an annual tax on the value of the car. Many states do not have that personal property tax. If you went back to that state-by-state MoDOT comparison, Kansas has it, Kentucky has it, and Nebraska has it, or something very, very similar to it. Nebraska has an annual motor vehicle fee that is basically the same as a personal property tax. We pay sales tax. Every time we fund transportation whenever we buy sales tax. Now this is not statewide. There are plenty of more rural counties and smaller towns in Missouri that don't have that transportation sales tax. Congressional earmarking. This is kind of a slide all to itself, but I wanted to throw it in there because it is very interesting. It's pretty self-explanatory how when they pass every 4 to 5 years a new highway authorization bill, how earmarks have just exploded. Now it's important to point out this is not the only cause for the increase in spending. What it's really doing is it's taking the amount pledged to the transportation funding, and when there were only 10 earmarks, what they were doing is taking that pot of money and generally sending it to states and just saying to their state highway engineers, you decide how to spend it. What you have much more now of is congressmen are, after consulting with cities or constituents, are determining what needs to be spent. There's both good and bad to this. I certainly like the idea of elected officials accountable to the people making decisions on how to spend money. However, there's certain areas where I would more prefer engineers who are experts in this area to decide how to spend the money. I think generally with transportation, I prefer the latter, trusting it to the engineers and not to the interest groups of congressmen. But there's an argument both ways. And you can avoid that asterisk that referred to something that's not germane to here necessarily. All right. And feel free to pop up with questions at any point. How could we pay for our roads? In Missouri, we have a pretty set way. We do it by taxes, and we don't really we have no tolling except for the bridge, but other states are doing all sorts of a lot of ingenuity, creative ways to pay for transportation. And the problem here is that MoDOT has forecast an $18.3 billion revenue shortfall over the next 20 years. So this is an issue. Like, how are we going to address this long-term shortfall? And this is more than half. This is not 18.3 out of 1 trillion. This is more than half of their total projection of needs over the next 20 years. So this is a major amount. I actually think, though, that that number should be recalculated. It was put together around 2007, and considering that the stimulus funds, for better or for worse, the stimulus funds are being used for a lot of those projects. And the Brookings Institution actually came out with a very interesting paper recently that documented how vehicle miles traveled per person were actually declining even before the energy spikes of 2008. So, but when you consider that travel is declining with higher energy costs, I believe if MoDOT recalculated this number, it would be slightly less. It, however, would still be an enormous revenue shortfall, and I don't question the seriousness of that problem at all. All sorts of ways that we could pay for our roads. One, higher gas taxes. Probably the simplest way. Gas tax has a lot of good things going for it. It's a good user fee. If you don't drive a lot, you don't pay for much of it. One interesting thing that could be thought of for Missouri is local option gas taxes, where cities could impose their own gas tax. I like the Tennessee model, which has a local option gas tax, but it's very limited. You can only impose a very small additional gas tax. This is compared to Chicago, which has authority for a local option gas tax. And when you combine Illinois' higher gas tax with Chicago's local option gas tax, with the fact that Illinois, unlike most states, levels sales tax dollars on the purchase of gasoline, you get there's a reason why Chicago has the highest gas taxes in the country just about, and there's a reason why when you have gas spikes, you see right across the line in Indiana, you see lines out like crazy. There's people waiting to buy gas in Indiana or up in Wisconsin before they go there. But with Missouri's low gas taxes to pay for our revenue shortfall, I think if we have to raise the state gas tax a bit, I don't think most people would really object to that. We do it with tolling. A lot of states are using tolling. It's becoming a little more common. What's really changing is the way people are starting to do tolling. The kind of enormous toll plaza collection booths that you might think of in the Northeast or Chicago are being replaced. Nobody would come into the state of Missouri and build a toll road or a toll bridge now that had manual collection booths, except maybe one far off to the right for the one car that doesn't have the easy pass or can't do the license plate billing that they do in other places. So it's much more faster and efficient with they found whenever they install these easy pass systems that the vast majority of people who regularly use that toll sign up for it very quickly. Mileage-based taxes, very interesting, very controversial. They've started a pilot program on this in Oregon. So this is something that's happening, where instead of paying gas taxes, you pay by the miles that you travel. Do it by GPS in your car, and that keeps track of it. There's a lot of good things that can come from it. You can adjust that based on the size of the car, what type of roads you're riding on. That GPS can tell if you're on a local road with a small car or if you're a big SUV on an interstate, and kind of adjust the rate accordingly. It's a very good way to ensure that people who are driving a lot pay for those roads. However, when I read transportation riders who advocate for it, a lot of those people don't seem to share the very legitimate privacy concerns that a lot of people out there have. I certainly share those privacy concerns. I have no desire for the government to know where I'm going at all times. And I think there's a lot of questions. Of course, they say they'll never use it for anything but the tax, but you know, most of the people here aren't probably believing that, and I agree with you. We actually have a way in Missouri that could address this if you paid your mileage tax as part of your simple annual inspection at your repair shop, where they noted your odometer reading from a year ago and noted your odometer reading from now, and you could base the tax on that if it replaced the gas tax. Not every state has that, and I don't know if the federal government would want to do that. So as I'll say, repeat it twice, I think there's a lot of potential for mileage-based taxes, but in my opinion, only if the privacy issues can be addressed, and I'm not sure they ever can be addressed. General sales taxes. We do not impose the state sales tax on the purchase of gasoline. Some other states do. This is very interesting. We certainly can do it, and that would raise revenue quickly. But that's one of the reasons, as politicians, they did it at the national level a lot through these energy gas spikes, because we pay gas taxes by the gallon as opposed to sales taxes, which are a percentage of price. As gas prices rise, get up to $3 or $4 a gallon, the tax level actually becomes a smaller portion of that gas, not a larger one. So elected officials who propose these $4 gallon gas, let's eliminate the gas tax for a little bit. I don't think they realize how little they might be accomplishing. For example, 17 cents a gallon at $1 gas is 17% of the bill. If you get up to $4 a gallon gas, it's just 4% of the bill. I mean, it's not as smart a way as some people seem to think. And if you wanted to accuse elected officials of grandstanding, that probably wouldn't be the first time that it ever happened. Question?
One of the worries on that issue is counties that border other states would then possibly be at a disadvantage for, like, for instance, West Quincy versus Quincy, Illinois, Chicago and Indiana, you know, some areas down like Nebraska, you know, Iowa, whatever. Is that also a concern, you know, that we could get a decreasing return on the gas taxes if that were enacted? You know, so it would look good on paper, but we could be pushing people across the board.
Well, I think when I recall from about a year and a half ago, especially during the campaign, most of those calls came at the federal level. So that would apply 18.4 cents across the board. So, but Missouri, there's no doubt. Missouri, people come to Missouri. I'm mostly familiar with St. Louis. There's a lot of people who work in downtown St. Louis who live in Illinois. One thing they do when they're over in Missouri is they fill up with gas. They do. That's just part of it. I think the difference in price between Kansas and Missouri is a little bit lower, so you probably have a little bit less of that really going out of your way. It doesn't make much sense when you're only maybe a 2 cent per gallon difference. But you see it, and yeah, if one state froze it and another didn't, yeah, you'd have a reverse reaction to that. So, what are Missouri's options? As I think a lot of people here know, the state constitution, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, forbids the use of toll roads on the state transportation system. So in some ways we are very limited in what we can do unless the Constitution is amended, which has been tried a few times and failed miserably. The last several times it's been tried. However, as you each have a couple policy studies in front of you, there was a poll taken about 2 years ago by Rasmussen Reports which showed 53% of Missourians would prefer tolling over gas price increases. So maybe that's changing. And I'm going to talk about, on the next slide or two, about how that constitutional limit is not quite as dramatic as you might think. Public-private partnerships to build transportation assets. MoDOT has unsuccessfully attempted 2 of them. They have gained authority from the legislature, however, to try to use more and more of them, which is great. Eventually, we'll try one that works. They wanted to do one on the new Mississippi River Bridge connecting downtown St. Louis to Illinois. They really wanted to do it via a privately financed toll road. Illinois objected vehemently, somewhat strangely in that there was one state which has no tolling, trying to advocate for a toll road, and one state which has extensive tolling, particularly in the northern part of the state, vehemently opposing a toll road. So it was somewhat peculiar, but it's all a moot point. was not passed as such, probably because the federal government and Illinois are picking up the bulk of the tab, so MoDOT could not really fight that hard on something where they're paying much less of it than the other state. The other, I call it unsuccessful, would be the Safe and Sound Bridge program. That program is ongoing. It's just being used with more of the typical state transportation bonding. It was unsuccessful to be used because they tried to privately finance it, but the economy sort of sunk that after they'd moved forward with it quite far. Design build concept I throw out here because many people sort of consider it a very low level public-private partnership due to the increased cooperation between the contractors and the government. Those have worked, and MoDOT just got authority to do more of them, which is great. The new I-64 in St. Louis is an enormous design build project. I live right by it. I've always lived off of Highway 40, as we call it in St. Louis, and that project is going fantastically well. You cannot praise MoDOT and the contractors enough, and I don't say that because they don't pay me to say that. I only say it because it's true. And the Paseo Bridge in Kansas City is an ongoing project that's using a design build, and I understand the early preliminary results in that are going very well. Pilot programs, and I've got the whole quote, and I could show you. It's interesting. You may or may not know, it's generally illegal to just take a road built with gas tax dollars and toll it. Like a state can't just do that. Say we built it with gas taxes 30 years ago, now we want to toll it to make more money. However, about a decade ago, a little longer, the federal government passed a pilot program to allow a few examples of that. And little known, I-70 in Missouri is one of the programs. MoDOT applied for that pilot program and got permission. So there's only 3 allowances, and we have one of the 3. One of them is still unused right now. So as MoDOT talks about how to expand I-70, should they do truck-only lanes and all sorts, and I don't want to startle anybody. MoDOT does not plan to, their hope is not to do it as a toll road. MoDOT wants the authority to use more toll roads and kind of the outer areas, a bridge here or a special project there. They don't want to just take the major roads and toll it. I wish they did, but they do have authority to do it on I-70, which is very interesting. Question.
I have an understanding that a very large percentage of all traffic in Missouri is on I-70 between St. Louis and Kansas City. What is that percentage?
I don't know offhand. I could get that number for you easily. I've got some MoDOT reports back at the office.
Very significant. In other words, the traffic on I-70, is 70% of all the traffic miles driven in the state of Missouri.
You know, I think I-44 is a pretty good percentage too. I don't think it would be 70%. Oh, it's very high. And I-44 is high as well. And traffic on I-44 is growing at a faster clip as the fastest growing part of our country, at least until the recent economic situation, has been the Southwest. And so I-44 traffic is growing very rapidly. But then when MoDOT talks about redoing these highways, they're talking about I-70 and I-44. They're talking about both of them. So all right. What are the ways they do it elsewhere? And there's a lot of creative ways, and I love talking about this stuff, and I hope it's as interesting to you as it is to me. You're probably familiar with high occupancy vehicle lanes. We don't have any in Missouri. I wish we did. They're fairly common in other states. They are very slowly but surely giving way to high occupancy toll lanes. I-25 in Denver is one that I've ridden on, and the concept is very simple. You have a high occupancy vehicle lane, and now they're switching it over that if you hit that occupancy requirement, 2 people, some places 3, it's still free to use that lane, that express lane. But also now, if you're just solo and you're willing to pay a toll to get into it, you can do that. I don't know if you've ever sat in traffic and seen a way underutilized HOV lane with a car every 200 yards scooting past. That's a way just to guarantee that lane gets its maximum usage of free-flowing traffic. You never want to have that toll set at a level where it starts to back up. Variable rate tolling is simply where the toll rate changes based on time of the day and congestion level. Route 91 in Los Angeles is the most prominent example in the United States of that. There are others coming, again, slowly but surely. It's very simple. You're going to pay a lot to use Route 91 at rush hour, where you might save a half hour or 45 minutes on your way. You're going to pay much less to use it in the middle of the day or late at night when you might save 5 minutes. It's designed to maximize the free-flowing use of that particular route, so that it's always getting as much traffic as it can, but will never get backed up. This is important because, as we're going to, as Professor Small is going to talk about in his paper, which you all have, it's very important to make sure that these additional capacity that you add through tolling gets its maximum usage, because that's what benefits the people who don't pay for it, who in the other lane. So you get as many people off of that onto that variable price lane. Again, Route 91, it was actually so successful, and then they had some problems with some of the contractual agreements with what the state of California could build alongside of it as that area grew, that the government had to buy Route 91 back from the investors. But it's still a variable price toll and still very successful. It's very interesting. There's some critics of it as a variable rate tolling assume that only it'll be used for the wealthy, the ones who can afford it every time. But research has shown there's all sorts of people who use it for all sorts of reasons, and many people who might just use it one time a week. Do you know what daycare centers charge if you're late to pick up your child? You know, that $10 you might pay to get you there 20 minutes faster is going to save you a bundle of money if you're running late. There's also, if you're a salesperson on the way to a business meeting where being late would look terrible, there's all sorts of times and options where people are willing to pay that toll, where the next day they're probably not. Private operation of toll roads. I find this fascinating, and have ridden on both of these turnpikes. I spent a lot of time up in Chicago, northern Indiana. Has anybody here ridden the Chicago Skyway? And you probably, if you have, since it feeds into the Indiana Turnpike, you've probably ridden them both. A foreign consortium, Australian and Spanish, paid the city of Chicago $1.8 billion, cash on the table, like it's an old movie or something. You know, cash on the dollar for a 99-year lease, and this is very key. They did not buy it; they leased it out to operate the Skyway, and that is money the city of Chicago then took and is using for all sorts of ways. $1.8 billion upfront payment. Indiana got $3.5 billion for their Indiana Turnpike, which for a 75-year lease, which they're now put in the bank to use for transportation expenses all throughout the state. Obviously in Missouri, we don't have anything like this to lease out. The value of the Lake Ozark Community Bridge would be, it has a value for it. I don't want to deny it, but it would be dramatically less. But, and we'll get into some of the, next slide or two, we're going to get into some of the concerns with these ways of doing it, and there are legitimate concerns. One of my favorite sort of creative transportation in Missouri, and one of the few examples I know of are the reversible lanes outside of downtown St. Louis on I-70. They do a great job of controlling the congestion traffic in 70. If you're there, there's two middle lanes that go eastbound in the morning, westbound in the evening, and just thought I'd put that out there because we don't have a lot of creative examples in Missouri. I want to talk about Lake Ozark Community Bridge briefly. As we've discussed, it's the only tolled asset in Missouri. It's also the only Missouri Transportation Corporation project. This is a government, I talk about a lot when I talk about public-private partnerships. This is not a PPP. This is a government entity, a Missouri Transportation Corporation with a board of directors from the area. They run it. This is not a privately, they financed it through bonds and make it back to tolling, but it opened in 1998, cut the route around the lake by almost an hour, depending on the season, obviously. But it's been very successful. It is very popular. I've ridden it. Toll is $2.50 in season, $1.50 out of season, so that when it's mostly locals using it, the toll is significantly reduced. It has been successful, and it has addressed a lot of needs, but its bonds were recently downgraded by Fitch Ratings, who is concerned that they're not willing to set the toll rate high enough to, over the long run, address the bonds. And this is a very common concern and problem with government-operated toll roads, that for political reasons, they subsidize the toll. They're not willing to set it what it needs to be to pay for the long-term operation. And then when they do inevitably have to raise it, it's a dramatic increase all at once. I think it's probably much better for small increases each year to deal with operating costs. That's what you're going to see on the Skyway and the Turnpike up in Chicago and Indiana. So I don't mean to say here that this project is in financial difficulty because the bond's downgraded. They have enormous cash reserves. They're making all their payments. It's been very successful. There was talk, and I don't think it ever got beyond talk, about something like this to address some traffic concerns at Table Rock Lake, but I believe that the stimulus funds went in that direction, so that talk is no longer needed. They're getting their improvements that way. Common issues with tolling and public-private partnership, toll rate regulation. You know, it's almost, in areas of Europe, Latin America, where you predominantly finance your intercity transport via toll roads, what they found, and in the Missouri Changing Transportation Paradigm paper that you have, there's a lit review section that discusses this in detail. They found that with a lot of toll roads, they sort of end up competing against each other. That if one raises its toll too high, that somebody would be willing to drive a little bit out of their way and take another cheaper toll road. But in America, particularly in Missouri where we have nothing, it's going to be necessary if toll roads start to come into play. They're going to be oftentimes sort of monopolistic. So some level of government regulation to prevent those, to keep a limit on those tolls is probably necessary. Government subsidies of the toll road might seem strange, but I'm going to talk about this in more detail shortly. Length of franchise terms, very legitimate concern. How do you predict needs 99 years down the line or 75 years down the line? It's very, very hard. In any of these deals nationally, if Missouri were ever to do anything like this, absolutely the government is going to have to take a very hard look at the length of these terms and perhaps make them a little shorter. What that does is it's going to reduce your payment and what you get from those private companies, but that might be a trade-off well worth it. Non-compete agreements, sometimes these are a huge deal. With the Skyway, where you've got, in Chicago where you have local roads just all alongside of it, it's not a big deal. With the Turnpike, where it's the only real highway there for most, it's a very big deal, particularly as you get a little farther into Indiana. They have a very strict non-compete agreement where Indiana cannot build other highways within a certain area without paying the operators a fee. Non-compete agreements are necessary. Nobody's going to invest something if the next year the government can build a free 1 mile from it. But they're, again, very legitimate concerns and very important for governments to address on these programs. Foreign company involvement, not a legitimate concern, in my opinion, unlike the others. If we go to war with Spain and Australia in those unlikely events, they can't just take their roads and leave. We can always keep the roads. They're a lease anyway. If the Spanish-American War is renewed, I don't think that Cintas Corporation is going to launch behind-the-line strike from the Chicago Skyway. So I don't think there's, a lot of people do have concerns with it. I think this is an example of insourcing, not outsourcing. And finally, toll booths, Easy Pass, and shadow tolls. We've talked about the toll booths. Shadow tolls are very interesting. They're very common in the United Kingdom, and they're starting to be used on some ongoing projects in Florida. That's where a private company comes in, builds the road, finances the road, but then instead of collecting a toll on it, the government just counts the number of cars that use that road and pays that company based on the number of cars. The bad part of that is there's no market force in there to encourage people to limit their driving or when they use it, like a variable rate toll or tolling in general might do. The good part of it is that toll collection is between 10 to 20% of any toll route, so you're kind of knocking 10 to 20% off the cost right off the bat if you're not collecting a toll. So, again, very common in the UK. Professor Ken Small's paper for the Show Me Institute. You all have it at your table. I'm going to discuss it briefly. It's a terrific paper. If you enjoy this issue, you are going to love this paper. He's one of the United States' premier transportation and sort of urban infrastructure economists out of the University of California, Irvine. I highly recommend it. I just want to highlight a few of the great questions that he raises in the paper. He questions the assumption that tax-exempt financing from a government is always better than non-tax exempt financing from private companies. As he points out, if the government is then receiving a portion of that taxable financing back in the form of taxes, then maybe at certain rates and at certain levels, the government is just as well off as it would have been, and the taxpayers are just as well off. So it's a very interesting question. Discusses why the private sector efficiency advantages might be limited in transportation. Many of us believe, I speak for myself, I believe that of course the private sector brings efficiency advantages over government in many ways. However, unlike a lot of other areas, whether the government bids out a transportation project or whether a private company bids out a transportation project, it's the same few large-scale construction companies that are bidding on all of them. So So while he doesn't deny that they exist, and particularly in transit operation and some other areas, and management incentives, it's important to keep in mind that maybe those privatization advantages aren't quite as great in this field as in some others, because we can safely assume that Weber Contracting in St. Louis, or whoever a big contractor in Columbia, is doing the best job they can, whether they're working for a private company or whether they're working for Boone County. And that's very true, but there are still incentive advantages that private operations can give those companies, which can lead to some financial savings. And here is a very interesting part. Even if you try and get private financing roads, bridges, pay for it with tolls, it might be still necessary for government to subsidize and invest in that in some way, because as I mentioned briefly earlier, if somebody were to throw in a $100 million project and then they have to set a toll rate to recover that $100 million plus operating costs, well, maybe that toll rate is too high to get enough people off the other roads onto that new road. And perhaps if the government invested or subsidized, used tax dollars for a quarter of that project, maybe that toll set at $750 million is going to get enough people off of the other roads that now it benefits every taxpayer. Now the people on the existing roads before that are getting lower traffic because the new road is full. And when I say full, again, not congested, just back up to free flow capacity. And again, I can't recommend his paper enough. What should the gas tax be? We're getting sort of near the end here. I've seen a lot of different studies that have talked about what should the gas tax be to pay for the externalities of driving. What are those externalities? They're pretty obvious. Global warming, pollution, congestion, traffic accidents. These are what we all, every time we drive a car, we contribute to this. And you have a article from The Economist in the papers I gave you that discusses this in depth. Professor Small has recommended a gas tax of $1.01 per gallon to deal with these externalities. The article you have at your table suggests $1.43. A joint AIE Brookings Institution paper recommended a $1.75 increase. These are just what people should pay in order to properly address the true cost of what they're driving. I tend to go for a number of reasons. I like Professor Small's number for various reasons. I don't think Professor Small is the type of person who's trying to change how we live our lives. I think at some of the other think tanks, they actively want you driving less and want you to change your lifestyle. I think he's simply trying to address the real cost of what you're doing. Also, his $1 a gallon is not an increase. That's from the current, it's really only a 61-cent increase from a current nationwide 40-cent state and federal average. And it includes the cost of simply maintaining and building new roads. It's not strictly the externalities. So you can Google that paper rather easily. But I think, as I said earlier, a lot of these papers make a mistake in that they assume that the gas taxes are the only way we fund transportation in various states. In a state like Missouri, as I went into extreme detail on, we pay for it all sorts of ways. And for example, what you pay to your road and bridge property tax is certainly dealing with congestion. What you pay in transit sales tax is certainly dealing with pollution. So we do it all sorts of ways. How not to pay for our highways? I've never read a study that recommended getting rid of the gas tax entirely and replacing it with a general sales tax for transportation. I have heard some supporters of MoDOT's, of tax increases for MoDOT suggesting this at the various forums I've been at. I don't know how serious they are about it, but I've definitely heard them talk about, let's just get rid of the gas tax, we'll do it, pay for everything via sales taxes dedicated to transportation. That's going to raise revenue very efficiently. There's no doubt about that. But that's all it's going to do is raise revenue. It's not going to address who drives a lot, who drives a little, and who's paying the fair cost of what they're using. Cyclists, as I say here, cyclists and truckers would be paying the same amount of increase in taxation under that plan. People who have long commutes to work and live in the exurbs of St. Louis or Kansas City, people who work from home. If it's all sales taxes on general stuff, you're going to pay the same amount. So, as I say, it would be an incentive to increase driving as you're now paying for things in what you buy, not on how much you're driving. A few conclusions. I've read a lot of these papers. MoDOT's got the funding shortfall that is undeniable. I think it's pretty clear that state and federal gas taxes will have to be increased. And at some level, I see nothing wrong with that. And as I said, I would support a local option for that as well, as long as it was tightly controlled. I would support per mile taxation only if the privacy issues can be addressed, and I'm not so sure they ever can be. I think it's reasonable to continue funding local systems through local property and sales taxes, particularly since a lot of those local sales taxes are how we fund transit in Missouri. That's not all going to roads. I believe that Missouri should expand the authority to use toll roads and private highway financing. As I said, the Constitution is not as strict against toll roads as you might think. There's nothing that prevents Boone County from building a local road with a toll. That's perfectly legal. There's nothing that prevents private finance highways. MoDOT believes that privately financed parts of our state transportation fund are completely constitutional as well. There's ways to use tolling in the system. Certainly there might be challenges to that if it ever happens and there'd be a court ruling, but I think, and MoDOT seems to think it would work. And I want to read, the only abject reading from paper I'm going to do, but I want to share Professor Small's conclusion from on page 27 of his paper. To summarize, the private provision of highway services offers benefits in many situations. It deserves a prominent place in highway policy, especially given its potential to provide new capacity in a fiscally constrained and congestion-challenged environment, which we are now, if ever. In order to utilize these benefits and to prevent undesirable outcomes, however, the public sector must be sophisticated in setting the terms under which private firms operate. Completely agree with that. This is not, the government has a role to play in dealing with the options that private financing and private companies have. And with that, I think I'm all done.
Okay, let's take some questions. People have ideas, and let's share right here.
I was curious about the federal tax being collected, and how much and what percentage of that is redispersed back to the states?
Well, in a way, just about all of it is redispersed back to the states. It's 18.4 cents, of which 18.3 is the gas tax, and 0.1 cent is the leaking underground storage tank fund. The diesel tax is 24.4, but all of it is redistributed back to the states, to state highway departments via either earmark or block grants. And there's a lot of controversy as to donor states and donee states, and some states that send more in gas taxes in than they get back, and some states that send a lot less in that they get back. And Missouri, as I understand, is a donor state in that we don't get quite back. We don't get as much as we send in. It's actually very close. There are other more egregious examples. I don't care necessarily that one state might send a little more and one state might get a little less, provided that the most important needs of our nationwide transportation system are being addressed. But there's a lot of evidence that, for example, a lot of the donor states are states in the South and Southwest which have had the most growth, so they're really not getting, that's where the transportation needs are the greatest for new assets, new infrastructure, and they're not getting it back. A lot of it's still going to the Northeast, which they're the donees, where there's far less growth.
Well, the next question is along with this, since it's a limited universe to build these things, what is the labor cost for the average labor cost for those companies? In truth, how do they really work with the federal government?
Well, you know, the huge ones like Bechtold or the consortium that's building the I-64, yeah, they go around the country. The enormous ones, the gigantic projects, the $500 million projects, you know, the nationwide ones come in and then they subcontract so much to local people. So as for labor costs, that's why in some areas of transportation, particularly transit operation, where there's proof that the cities that contract out a lot of it are saving money than cities that don't. Denver and Las Vegas are saving a lot of money because they contract out a lot of their transit compared to St. Louis or Kansas City, and labor costs are the big difference there. But for some large construction company that's probably unionized all the way, I mean, if half their business is with the various governments, many of them requiring union contracts, and half is with private companies, we still presume that they're going to do the best they can for either one, which is not to say that there aren't some savings that they can bring to play in the private financing. There are. It just might not be quite as significant as you see in other industries, in other fields. And there aren't a whole lot of examples of this, particularly in Missouri. It's a limited field. We haven't seen a major public-private partnership happen in Missouri. So we haven't had the opportunity measure these savings. But where they have happened, they've been positive. If you had more private financing in the, and I can refer some of this to Dr. Hasley, if you have more spending in it, sorry, sure, you might have new companies come into play to address the greater private financing. There's no limitation on who can do that work. But those same companies, you're not going to, the private transportation market is very small compared to the public transportation market. So even those new companies are going to want to be bidding on government projects for the bulk of their work as well. So yes, I think even with growth and new competition within it, you're still going to see people setting themselves to bid, do whatever they have to do to bid on the public contracts.
The shortfall in MoDOT's funding resources versus their needs over the next 20 years, is that similar to other states?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. I think it might even be, I honestly don't know. I think it's probably similar. I think most states are predicting these long-term shortfalls. It is dramatic. It's 50%. Now that's a very all-inclusive
Right.
kind of bells and whistles shortfall. Like if we get everything we think we need. So there's certainly cuts that can be made from that projection which won't dramatically affect our transportation system. But I agree it's serious. I don't know how it compares to other states. I would imagine it's significant because we have lower gas taxes and no tolling compared to other states.
We've been over the Kansas Turnpike probably 1 million times from Colorado, and we go over it all the time, and we've seen it go up, you know, incrementally, the toll. Is it anywhere near self-supporting, or do you know?
I do not know. I do not know the details of Kansas, but if it's going up incrementally and in regular increases, I would have to guess yes, because that's why they're raising it incrementally, to match costs as they go, as opposed to like the outer 294 in Chicago, which is well known as one with no toll increase, no toll, and then they'll just double it right away because they have such dramatic shortfalls to it. Now that's a public road. That's operated by the Kansas Turnpike Authority. That's not a private toll. But if they're doing it incrementally each year, they're doing that to do in a very serious way to match their costs each year. So it's probably operating very, very efficiently.
Tax per gallon and tax per miles driven are both a proportion of the usage, different proportions, different entities collect the tax. I'm wondering what do you see the advantages and disadvantages of each of these?
Well, from the government's perspective, before I give you mine, the advantage for a tax per mile is that new cars like a Prius that get great gas mileage are going to pay more to the government for the system. So it's from the federal government or MoDOT's perspective that per mile traveled is an answer to really efficient cars and hybrids, and to ensure that they get the funds to spend. From my own perspective, yeah, they're very, very similar. For one way, we try and encourage people to buy gas-efficient cars so we become less dependent on fossil fuels, and then we try, on the other hand, to punish them by saying, well, now you have to pay by mile travel because you're not paying enough by gas. So it's sort of a conflict there. But what I like about it in the GPS is that you can change it by that car so that you don't punish that Prius owner who says, you just bought a gas-efficient car, a light car that's using a lot less wear and tear than a heavy SUV, and I own an SUV. So you can do that as part of it. You can adjust it to cars and gas mileage and all sorts, and it's that adjustment that I like about it. I like it in theory. I'm not sure you'll ever be able to address the very legitimate privacy concerns, and I don't think it's going to happen. The Secretary of Transportation just hinted at it in a speech several months ago, and the public reaction was very opposed to it, and they quickly backtracked from that. There was a federal transportation panel that came out just last year and recommended this, said, let's go to vehicle miles traveled, and that has gone absolutely nowhere in Congress because of the opposition to it.
So would you say that the tax per gallon is the more freedom promoting form of the tax?
Well,
instead of punishing and rewarding and all that stuff, why not just pay per gallon used?
well, I think we'll both answer that. I like a system that's making people pay for what they're using, but not to pay more for it. So I don't like vehicle miles traveled on top of gas taxes. I mean, if there's a way that they can replace each other, and if you buy it, because you're still going to benefit if you buy a high gas mileage car, because you're still going to put less gas into that. So you still pay less. But then I'd like it to be adjusted to by that car, that Carmen Ghia. Does anybody still drive Carmen Ghias? That's putting a lot less wear and tear than my Dodge Durango on the road. They should pay less. So yeah, I think they can both promote freedom, and that really they both promote user-based fairness and a user-based system of paying for the road.
So I'll answer like an economist. There was an economist named A.C. Pagoo back in the early 1900s who talked about taxes and externalities, and some sort of hybrid. If you actually wanted to get to a Pagoovian tax, you do some sort of hybrid between miles traveled and gas tax to try to get at the externalities that are going on with maybe the larger vehicles or those who produce producing more of the negative externalities, if you want to go that route. So, no one tax is probably going to be ideal in this situation. And I don't know about the freedom part is a little bit trickier. They're conceptually they don't match one for one.
So we want a weight tax too.
Well, on the roads, yeah. I mean, but that's why the truck tax. I mean, that's why the truckers pay a bit more taxes than I do. Yes.
As I'm listening to all the ways to tax drivers and weight of vehicle, where is the incentive in all of this to make the construction of the roads better? I mean, to use new technology and to I don't know, I'm not a technical person, but even nanotechnology that would allow the roads to heat up during the winter. Where in all of this is there a balance between using and taxing the use and an incentive to build better roads?
Well, we're finally, I'll give a couple concrete examples. They finally got around in St. Louis and Kansas City, just in recent years, they finally got around to taking some of their funds and timing their traffic lights. I mean, this was a major part of the new I-64 project where they shut down the whole highway in the middle of St. Louis. And the county said, well, finally we need to time all these lights on the arterial roads that people are going to be using. So there can be an incentive in just trying to use tax dollars to the best, to get the most that you can out of tax dollars. And signalizing your traffic lights can be incredibly successful and can be incredibly effective at they shut down the whole middle highway last year and almost nobody noticed because the arterial roads, this year has been harder. They tightened up with the section they shut down this year. But last year, almost nobody noticed because there were enough arterial roads and they took out stop signs at certain cities, insisted on having a stop sign. They said, no, the county came in and said, I don't care what you want. We're taking out a stop sign and we're putting in a signalized light. And there are all sorts of examples. On the new I-64 project, MoDOT, people started screaming at MoDOT because they said, you're not even adding capacity through all of this project. They're out in the western part, but the eastern part, there's no new lanes. Why are you doing this? And MoDOT said, saying the improvements to the exit ramps and the entrance ramps, which were so tight, the improvements to the hills, it was very hilly. Some of the worst accidents on I-64 were when you come over a hill, because the traffic there is into the sun each way. You come over a hill and they'd be right in the sun. Leveling it off, making improvements to exit and entrance ramps. They maintain that that's going to be a big part of that's going to have dramatic congestion effects without even adding capacity. So no, and we talk about this in some of the op-eds, that you've got better use of technology is a huge part of our increased better use of transportation tax dollars.
You just gave David another topic for a paper there, right? I mean, he's been talking about how do we pay for these things first of all, and you're talking about what kinds of roads should we
maybe the focus of this is different. I would like to know the technology that's behind.
No, there's absolutely technology plays a major role.
Yeah.
The intersection of Highway 40 and 270, they've been working on that for decades. That's a question is why, I've just changed what I was going to say. Why, how can we build into this system an intelligent sense for engineering? When I lived in Florida, it seemed like the roads were deliberately underdone so that the politicians could have something to pay off their friends every year, or every couple of years.
The political economy issues you just raised are immense and for another discussion.
and very real, like the relationship between government and spending. I mean, those are they just started on 270. They just started a variable speed limit stuff in an attempt to address congestion. They'll raise that speed limit now in times of a little use, and they'll lower it a little bit down to 55 or so in times of heavy use. So there's a 270 thing, and that they're finally done at that 64 and 270. It sat empty for years. It was very, very frustrating.
Okay, Dave, thanks a lot.
Thank you.